I think everyone's going to know that it's been recorded, right? Based on that pop-up I just saw. I'll just say it anyway.
I might just pop a message in the chat about any questions.
Yeah. You've frozen it. There we go. You've frozen it there. Right. Okay, 15 seconds. Right. Well, hello everybody, and welcome to this session of the Middle Way Words Book Festival. My name is Rus Madon, and I'm the author of Beowulf's Ghost, and I'm joined by Emma Finlayson-Palmer, who's the author of the Autumn Moonbeam book series. Just in terms of the format, we're broadly going to be asking questions about our books first. I'll be asking Emma some, she'll ask me, and then after that we'll just have a fairly open-ended discussion about writing. Just be aware that the session is being recorded, and also if you have any questions, please just pop them into the chat box and we'll do our best to answer them towards the end of the session. Okay, so Emma, on your book series, can you tell me the age of the reader that your books are aimed
at? Yes, they're marketed from 5 upwards, but about 5 to 8 or 9. But I'm having people older than that read them. People even in their 40s have said they've enjoyed them, even though they're short books. So they're quite thin compared to some, so it's quite a quick and easy read. But yeah, it's marketing. It's an awkward thing with marketing for the age group, is it? Because you have an idea of what the reader might be like, but actually readers of all ages will read that.
Yes.
No matter what the age group is for it.
It's more of a guide, I guess, to some of the booksellers, isn't it, on the shelves? But yeah, so it's interesting if you're saying, you know, a lot of adults will read these books as well and get a lot from them. Okay. Yeah,
I think that's a good thing with children's books. There's a lot of crossover appeal, isn't there, for adults with them?
Absolutely. So what was your inspiration for Autumn as a character and the story?
Well, I suppose the first thing, I always love writing anything with magic, and always have done. As a child, I always loved the Worst Witch books and the Ruth Manning Sanders, all her fairy tale books and anything with witches in or any kind of magic. So I've always written those sort of stories, but I've sort of combined witches alongside dancing, because my daughter does competitive cheerleading and dance. And she's really shy. In fact, it's something that she's inherited from me. We get very shy and anxious being in front of other people and talking in front of other people. Ironic, really, what I'm doing now. But she used to avoid eye contact before she went dancing. But when she's dancing as part of a team, she can perform in front of like hundreds of people. So I love that idea that as part of a team that you can sort of challenge yourself, push yourself to do more, and you know, if you're anxious, you can push through that because you've got your friends around you, and that's kind of the main inspiration for it. And I just love dance. I'm very clumsy, but I love dancing. So I'm a bit
has she read the book? Has she read the story? And does she see any of herself in it?
Well, because she's now 15, because it's taken so long before it got published, and I started writing it when she was still at junior school. I'm not sure if she's read the current draft. She's skimmed it, and I know she read some of the early ones, but she's more looked at it now and wanted to know, because her name's in the front, because it's obviously the inspiration. Yes. The first book was dedicated to her. But I don't think she's read the most current one, but I think she's just at that awkward sort of stage. And if she's going to read anything, it's more likely to be Hunger Games, or probably more likely to be your book. She really loves history. So so she's probably not into my books at the moment.
But she will be. She'll come back.
She'll come round one day.
One talking about your book, the one thing and here it is for people that maybe watching. It's I loved the character names. I'm just going to read a couple of them. So you have Zephyr, Moonbeam, Knotweed, Toadflax, Mr. Snail Cruncher, Miss Spinning Web. And I just wondered, where do you come up with such glorious names?
Well, I suppose a lot of it's inspired by nature, and yeah, because there's ones like sky and rainbow, but it's combining some of them as well to make that a bit creepy or silly, like the snail crunch one. I love the sound of that, and the crunch. Crunch is one of those words, isn't it, that it feels and sounds like what it actually is. And but yeah, that's one of my favorite parts of creating stories, is writing or creating the names. So I'll do big lists of names, so I'll get a bit of a word bank of the names. And I should have kept my notebook next to me with them in, but I have big long lists of names just to dip into. But
they sound very Roald Dahlish, some of them, to me, and I think I think they would all fit very nicely in some of those stories. I think they're wonderful names.
Oh, thank you. I was probably inspired a lot by Roald Dahl, because that was one of my favourite authors as a child. So I think, yeah, the Twits and Fantastic Mr. Fox and some of the names in those books, probably as a child, that's probably what's been percolating all these years to later now.
Yeah. So would you say he's been one of the main inspirations for this kind of writing, or what other authors would have inspired you?
Well, definitely when I was younger, I was a huge Dahl fan, so that would have been a big inspiration early on. And now, gosh, I read so many different books. There's so many wonderful books come out every week. There's Julie Sykes is one of my favourite ones recently. She writes a lot of chapter books, and Paula Harrison does. So just for that kind of age group. But I mean, even reading adult fiction, there's bits of inspiration you can take from everything, isn't there? And a bit of a Netflix addict now as well. That every so often have a bit of a binge. And to me, that's research when you're creating stories. Everything is sort of inspiration.
Yes, so. I like the idea of watching Netflix as research. I'll have to.
It's definitely research.
I like that.
I'm sure it's tax deductible.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, again, on the creativity side, you've got some very creative food in your stories. And here, you've got fried snail's eggs on earwig toast. And I just wondered, have you ever tried that in the interest of research?
I haven't. I can't think why I haven't tried that, but yeah, it's I don't think even for research I could bring myself to eat that. I remember when I was young, and my little sister, she was caught trying to eat a snail's eggs. That's probably stayed with me all those years.
Yes,
they're quite fascinating to look at. They're just they kind of got a little glittery bit inside. They do look quite appealing, and that's probably what's inspired me to have the idea of them.
It's stayed with you. You must have had fun inventing the food and fun inventing, that aspect of it, because it's throughout both books. I've noticed that you're very creative with the food choices, which I'm guessing would make a lot of small children go, ugh, which is what you want.
Yeah, well, when I read out the first chapter at any school visits I've done, when you get to the snail's eggs bit, you can see them go, oh. Yeah. And then the teachers usually say, oh, haven't you had that for breakfast today? But it is fun. I think it's all the things I suppose I think of when what I would have really enjoyed, not to eat myself, but things that I enjoy. The silliness, it's just so much fun, this age group.
Yes.
You can just do, I think the younger books that you can do, I don't know, you can just be really silly sometimes with serious themes in there as well sometimes. But yeah, it's just, you can come up with almost anything really for children. It's just all sorts of mad combinations.
Yeah. Well, I think it's certainly worked there. And again, on the, I'm just going to hold this up for people can see. It's the illustrations. I mean, the pictures here. Heidi Cannon has done these wonderful illustrations, and they're throughout the book. And I just wondered, did you have any input on that? Any final say, or was it just completely left to Heidi to come up with that? Because they really do bring a lot of the story alive.
Yeah, Heidi's illustrations are fantastic. That. The publisher UCLan is actually part of a university, so they send a brief to the students first of all, so they can submit things. But Heidi, I think, had already finished her degree, or she might have finished her MA with them, but she had been a former student there. But when I saw the pictures, I just knew that I mean, the publisher asked me if I was happy with them before they moved forward, but she'd done all sorts of samples, and she just kept it. It's like she'd taken the things I'd written about and just made them better. She just, I don't know, it was amazing just seeing how she'd created it, because obviously for this age group, there's a few more illustrations and sort of older fiction, and sort of like all the characters in the front of the book.
Yes.
And it's just, it's mind-blowing really that she can read the words and just create things that I wouldn't have even pictured. She's added so much in there, and it's so
it really works, and it really does help augment the story.
And I mean, in book 2, when there's a picture of Sparkledale Dance Academy, I'd imagine the dance academy quite boring in a way. It was a bit like a real life one, and they're kind of more often than not, and they're more like warehousey type buildings. And I suppose because that was where the sort of one that my daughter went to, that's what I'd got in my head. But Heidi had just got this absolutely amazing sort of big castle. I'll just see if I can scroll to the page quickly. This amazing huge castle that I just thought, this is much better than I could have ever imagined. So illustrations have brought so much to it. And I know she's illustrated a couple of other books for people as well, so hopefully we'll see lots more of Heidi's work.
Oh, that's very good. And I guess it just shows you how different people will interpret the written page in different ways.
And she seems to see in my head, so I think we've made a really good
connection. Yes, no, that's good.
I both love cats.
And actually, in the same theme as the picture, at the end of each book, you've got this wonderful section on learn to dance like autumn. With it's such a great idea, and I just wonder, have you tried to do those dance moves, or have you heard from any young people who've actually tried to do them? And just to explain to people listening, because you've got a couple of pages where you talk people through with the pictures exactly how to do a certain dance step, which I thought was a wonderful idea.
Yeah, in the early drafts of the book, the dances in the actual books were a lot more, possibly complex, maybe is the word. It got cut back a lot in the stories, and the focus was more on the characters. I think I went a bit too technical with some of the dance routines in early drafts, but those ones are actually Heidi's idea at the back. I don't know if she followed any of the dances actually that I'd written in there, but I have tried to, I have followed all the moves. I do need to start doing this for school visits, but I haven't plucked up the courage to do that yet.
It would be a great way to engage with the audience, I guess. Which
yeah, I think that would be quite fun.
Come on, everybody, let's dance like autumn. Yeah.
And so put your arms out like broomsticks and things like that. It could be lots of fun.
And I guess, well, where do you want to take the Autumn Moonbeam series? I'm not sure. I know there's 2 books out. I'm not sure how many there will be, but what's your overall kind of vision for that series and for autumn?
Well, I've got loads of ideas for other books. It's just now resting on sales and whether the publisher's going to want more, because obviously they bought 2. They are interested in more, and we have discussed a 3rd book, but we are sort of just waiting now on sales to see how it goes, because it's only been out 3 months, so it seems to be doing quite well. But it's that marketing with books. It's just making sure that you get it into the hands of the right people, and this is why I'm doing all the school visits and things and just trying to promote it. But the next one, hopefully, if there's a book 3, it'll be a Christmas one for next year. So I'm really hoping they do take it, because I really want a 3rd and Christmassy autumn book out there.
I just wondered if you were going to follow autumn through the different stages of dance class and dance school, and then, I could see how you could do a lot with that.
Well, I'd like to, because in early drafts, it was a much longer book, and actually there was probably about 3 or 4 books worth in the first draft. Right. So there's plenty of material to use, but it's been sort of chopped into multiple things and just rearranged to make it into shorter stories.
And I noticed that. Autumn, as you said before, has quite a lot of self-doubt, within the story. And what message, you touched on this, what message are you trying to convey to the young reader? And why?
I think it's because for me, I've always struggled a lot with anxiety, and I was so shy as a child that my mum often used to mouth all my words to work out what I was saying, because it was a proper mumbler. And I don't know if I still am a bit of a mumbler. I'm still very shy, so just putting myself out there is hard. And I really wanted that in a book, because I know that so many children must go through that. So many children are shy or anxious and feel really awkward in front of other people. So I really wanted to have Autumn as that sort of character. I suppose she takes a lot from me. I know the inspiration of my daughter. Lots of children out there, and I'm just wanting them to see themselves in there, and that even though sometimes things are hard to do, if so you really want to do something, like dancing with Autumn, it's the following your dreams. And like writing for me, that you just keep going with things. You just have to push, and you're pushing yourself out your comfort zone all the time, but it's worth it in the end.
Well, and you don't appear shy, so
I mask it well.
You're doing very well there. I think just finally, one last question would be on this would be around that. Interestingly, you've tackled diversity in the book as well, and obviously people need to read the book to know what I'm mentioning. But there is diversity in the book, and you've tackled it in a very natural way. And I'm just wondering, how important is that for you as a writer and for the audience?
It was really important for me because I was only diagnosed last year, I think it was, in my 40s, that I'm autistic. And I didn't realise for all these years I've been writing autistic main characters. And I finally realised once I had my diagnosis, and my youngest son was diagnosed a few years ago, and that's what made me realise perhaps I am too. But in the book, I also wanted to show just a really wide range of characters with different disabilities or different range of just different people, just what real life is like, and just have that in the book. So there's lots of children can see themselves in there, but that's not the focus of the story. It's just part of their world, which is what. So it isn't. I never mentioned that Autumn's autistic, but she is. But it just so that children that are maybe hopefully see themselves in the character.
Oh, that's very good. Yes. Oh, very good. No, thank you. I think that's very interesting. Very good discussion on Autumn there.
Thank you. Right, I'll move on to some questions for you next.
Yes, please. Yes. Let me have a look, and off we go.
So I've really enjoyed it. I haven't quite got to the end yet, but I think I've got about a quarter of it left to go. I'm really enjoying Beowulf's Ghost. So could you tell me a bit about what age group this is aimed at?
Well, it's sold as a 12 plus, a teen book for teens, but I think, like yourself, when you were talking about this, that I think that's more as a categorization for bookshops. I mean, there's no reason why a younger reader couldn't read it, or adult. In fact, I know a few adults that have read it, like within your reading circle, and they've enjoyed it. So, it's aimed at the teen market. And I think, when you're writing for children, it just means how you tackle certain themes are done in a certain way. But so, I always say it's for teens, but it's, if you're younger and you've got a mature reading age, there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to read it and enjoy it.
That's what I was saying before with children's books. It's lovely that it can be for any age, and I think anyone can enjoy these books, can't they? And I certainly enjoy them.
They can. I wish bookshops would actually have them all together and not have up to 12 and then you have to go upstairs to find the teens. It'd be quite nice if they were all together, because then when children are browsing, they can just browse across into other age groups and start exploring more.
Yeah, because it can be a bit off-putting sometimes if something's in a specific age group. They think, oh, it's not for me.
Yes. Yes.
But I can see from the bookshop point of view, they need to have somewhere to place it. So it's a tricky one. So, so could you tell us a little bit about what the Beowulf's Ghost is actually about? Yes.
So very briefly, because for some people may not know about Beowulf. I think a lot of people do, but certainly children may not. Beowulf itself is an Old English poem, but a very classic Old English poem, probably written in the 10th century, but it's recording events through the oral tradition that probably happened in the 6th century. So it's a very, very old poem, and it deals with big mythic stories of Beowulf, a great hero, coming to the aid of people and fighting monsters, Grendel the monster, Grendel's mother, and a dragon. So, and it's been classically portrayed actually in Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit through J.R.R. Tolkien's writing, because he studied it. That's really what what Beowulf is about. It's a universal theme about overcoming your monsters. And in the book that I've written, Beowulf's Ghost, I wanted to do a couple of things. I wanted to retell the Beowulf story, and I've done that principally through Adam, who's the protagonist. He goes back in time and is mistaken for Beowulf, but he goes through quite a lot of adventures, and he's fighting his own demons inside him, his own monsters, as well as the external monsters. So there's that kind of retelling, and I've tried to recreate all the major scenes within the Beowulf poem in the book, but in a way that wouldn't be too obvious. So I would hope that if children do read it, they may later on want to become more acquainted with the classic poem. But the second thing I was interested in is what lies behind myth, and that really excites me when writing. So if you think of Robin Hood or King Arthur, what is behind that myth? There's always a seed of truth, and there's a seed of truth in Beowulf. Was he real? Nobody really knows. But to have that amount of oral tradition and a written word, there has to be something there. So what I was trying to do was to try to imagine what could the reality have been like. Clearly, it's a work of fiction, it's a fantasy, but I was just trying to write it in a way that was saying, well, this is what could have happened, which is quite different to what's written down, but that's the interpretation. So I was trying to kind of do those two things within the story, but essentially it is about a boy going through his own personal journey and trying to overcome the monsters that he finds.
And it's really action-packed. There's so much in there. It's some really tense scenes. I love that. It's is historical fiction or historical fantasy your favourite genre to write for?
I think historical fantasy, yes. I mean, I always make it very clear when I talk to people like this that I'm not a historical writer, because historical writers are a very different breed, and they're very accurate at what they do. I like historical fantasy. So whilst the actual setting I've researched heavily and it's accurate, when I've got angles and Celts and things, it's the usual thing writing, don't have them smoking tobacco and eating potatoes before they were ever brought over, to Britain. But I like the fantasy aspect of it. I like to bend history. So I really enjoy that idea of people going back in time or forward in time, and what would they see? What do things feel like? Which is why I'm a real fan of the Doctor Who concept, and I just love Doctor Who for that reason. He's constantly going back and forward in time. So historical fantasy for me really excites me, where you have a certain historical kind of background, but it's in what you do within that and how you change things and how you interpret those things. But yeah, I definitely like writing about that genre.
Yeah, I think it's a genre as well that's becoming very popular again at the moment, isn't it? With I suppose Game of Thrones is a bit more brutal, but that popularity. But I especially like the Rings of Power and things like that at the moment.
Yes, I hope so. Yes, I don't think it's ever gone out of fashion. I think fantasy, it's like science fiction. It's always been there. It's whether or not it comes into the popular, the popular consciousness. But I think there's always been a very, very large and dedicated readership for those kind of stories.
I would say it's one that's probably never out of fashion. It's very popular. But the cover is really lovely of Beowulf's Ghost. Who actually designed the cover for that?
Oh, thank you. Yes, no, it is very nice. It's Ashton Hinton. It is the cover, and it's a wraparound to the back. So Ashton Hinton, she was proposed by the publisher to do that, and I worked with her. I helped. We collaborated on what the image should be. And that she's done a fantastic job, and there was quite a bit of collaboration where I had options about what could go in, what could change. So I'm very pleased with it, because it's been a very nice piece of if you like branding that goes on all the materials that I use. So it was one of those decisions that I made, that I really wanted some bespoke artwork for the cover, I think, to help the story. You can always choose existing art or existing pictures, but yeah, she's a very, very talented artist, and she's done other children's books as well. So I'm very pleased with that.
Yeah, I can just imagine that as a nice big print on the wall. So
yes,
yeah,
I have one here.
I did wonder. I thought it looked like the same sort of shape as the characters on the cover. Then yeah, it's a stunning one. That's one I'd have that on the wall. It's lovely. And the world building of Beowulf's Ghost, it's just so rich. It had such believable characters. You really become fully immersed in the story as you read. So did you have to do much research for it?
Well, thank you. Well, yes, I did. I do a lot of research for my books, and for this, I actually probably read about 15 different translations of Beowulf itself, and that grounded me in the characters, which characters I wanted to bring forward into the story. And I would say probably 80% of the characters are lifted from the poem themselves. People like Breca, Rita, Grendel, and Unferth. There's a couple of others that I added in. Obviously, Adam himself isn't in the story, but he becomes Beowulf. But the research I did was I've set the story in 6th century Northumberland around Bamborough, and for that reason, I spent a lot of time researching that. And I always set things in a specific year. It's actually set in 559 AD, and by doing that, it allows me to find out exactly, the Angles that were invading at the time. What would they wear? What would they eat? Same for the Celts of the time. So that's what I meant earlier by saying that I will make accurate. So the weaponry, the things that they would do, all those things are as accurate as they can be from a historical point of view. Clearly, I've overlaid on that the fantasy side of it, but I did quite a bit of research, and I went up there quite a lot, and really looked at the landscape, because the landscape for me is one of the things that I really love in the stories. And going into the Cheviot, where the Celtic stronghold is, I kind of went there and just really made sure I could understand what the moors looked like and the streams and everything. So I did quite a lot of research around that and around that period, which in old currencies was called the early Dark Ages. I think now it's early medieval. So there's not a lot that is written about it. And now, to some extent, for a writer, that's a gift, because it means you've got a lot more latitude in what you can do and what you can say. And if you're writing a story set 100 years ago or Victorian times, I mean, everybody knows so much about it. You're very tight in what you can actually do. So the fact it was set 1400 years ago, 1500 years ago, gave me a bit of latitude. But yeah, and I actually really enjoy doing research. It's and it's through research that I get ideas. And often by reading old texts and reading books, that's when ideas percolate up, and I'll find that I kind of incorporate them into the story.
Yeah, you can end up going down those research wormholes.
Oh yes, many times. Absolutely, yes. We as writers, we know that well. Yes.
Yeah, it's dangerous sometimes, but yeah, as you say, so many ideas come from research. So
yes,
you end up with whole other book ideas.
Yes. Yeah, and sometimes you use them in other stories.
So the main character, Adam, as we start the book, he's grieving because his sister has died. And throughout, it's a nagging feeling with him that he's to blame for her death. Was this a hard subject matter to tackle? Well,
it's a good question. And I think, as writers, as you were articulating with Autumn as well, we reach into ourselves when we're writing stories. And I think the older you get, the life means that you have certain experiences of grief, of loss, of anger, pain, love. So I think what I did here was I kind of focused on other areas, of loss that I've had in my life, and really just tried to understand that so that I could kind of write that into a character. So was it a hard subject matter? I wouldn't say it was a hard matter to do, but you have to kind of dig within yourself to really make sure you can make it real and make the emotional attachment real, what people are feeling. And I don't think that really matters what you're writing, whatever age you're writing for. I think you have to try to connect. So I think, I always think if you stop someone on the street and ask them for their life story, it probably will be full of all the same themes that we write about. It'll be grief and loss and love. And that's what people really, that's what people I think connect with. So yeah, I wrote some of that, lifting it from one area of my life into another to try to make it real.
And so I think we, as writers, put a lot of ourselves into stories sometimes, or borrow from ourselves.
I think you have to, and I think that's where you then get the emotional connection. Otherwise, it becomes a narrative, which is just which is great as an adventure. But to try to make it real, you've got to try and root it in something. So, yeah.
And that leads perfectly onto, is there a central message that you'd like readers to take away?
Well, it's if there's a central message, I again, without giving too much away of the book, I think it's that you have to believe in yourself. And I think it's similar, Emma, to what you were talking about. And I do think there's a fairly central theme in a lot of children's writing on this, that it's really important so what I'd like is for children to read this is just believe in yourself. And if you hear that nagging voice in your head telling you can't do something, try to suppress it or try to understand it, try to argue with it. don't let it rule your life. So believe in yourself, and do the best you can to overcome those monsters that you might have. And you might not realize that they are monsters. They could just be nagging doubts. But if you can overcome those, then you can be the best person that you can be. So I think the theme would be just please try and believe in yourself, which I do think you find a lot of those in children's stories. I think it's so important for children to know that.
Finding hope, isn't it?
It is. Well, thank you. Now that was I think that's been a good discussion about our books. I think if we just move on now, we can just have a bit of an interaction about maybe ourselves as writing. And I was I'm just checking the questions here, and there's an interesting question we can just rest on here, which is, do you think more should be done to promote reading to younger people? And if so, how can this be achieved? Well, that's a great question. I think the answer is definitely yes. If I could answer that first, I'd say, one way I think that it can be done personally is probably through reading to your children. So I don't really work in schools or anything like that, so I can't really talk to that. Maybe Emma, you could talk more to that. But I think one of the best ways for children to read is with their parents, if possible, or with their carers or whoever's looking after them. But having something read to you in your own home environment, I think, is a great way of learning the love of books and the love of stories as much as possible until the device takes over and you start playing games. So I think reading stories with children is a great way of doing it in a nice, safe environment.
Yeah, it was growing up and seeing my mum reading that really inspired me to read. And we often used to, there was a little library just a street or two away. So that was my favourite place to go as a child. I think for a lot of writers, that's probably the case, isn't it? But libraries are so important. And I think that's the trouble. So many are closing. This is something we all need to battle to keep these places open, because you can just escape in stories, and it's a safe place for children to explore all sorts of things.
I completely agree. I think libraries are wonderful places, and I certainly pretty much grew up in one. I was there all the time. I just remember so many books, just surrounded by them, and I could lose myself in them. Yeah. So Emma, how long have you been writing? And just what is it, very briefly, about your writing journey, and how did you get to be published?
Well, I started writing from a very early age. I can't pinpoint an exact date, but I know I had something published on CFAX when I was about 8, so going back quite a while. So I was obviously always very keen to send my writing into the world. And I can remember entering poetry into competitions at school and having a couple chosen for these sort of school anthologies or a little pamphlet that it was put into. Excuse me. I just tried all sorts of things over the years, and then in my teens it was the depressing song lyrics, and then in my early 20s I joined a local writing group, and I've been several since then. And it's something, there might have been periods in my life when I wasn't writing as much, but I was always doing some form of writing in some way. And I think I even turned shopping lists into stories, just everything becomes right. I just love it. I live and breathe writing. Even my clothes that I wear have usually got writing related themes on. In fact, the kids at work today asked if my dress with cats on was related to my book.
Lovely.
Cats.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, if it's in you, isn't it? And I think that's you often hear that with writers, that it's not about why you write. It's more a case, well, I can't not write. That
very grumpy if I don't write.
Yeah, and I've been writing from almost from as long as I can remember. And at school, at English, I used to just write very, very long stories, as much as I could, and then I would just write. I would write and write. And I think for a fair chunk of my life, I didn't do anything, but I always had it in me that I wanted to write. And then I joined a writers group, which was really, really useful, and I'd thoroughly recommend anyone do it, because you get critique and support, because writing can be quite lonely. So I think that was very useful. Another question's come up here, which is interesting. It's saying, how do you make your writing style or level appropriate to the age group? do you have to think sentence and vocabulary level? That's a very, very good question. Maybe Emma, what's your thoughts on that?
Well, I definitely did for autumn because of it being pitched at a slightly younger age group. And I think you have to, I suppose, read a lot for that age group and just be aware, really. I suppose I was surprised when I very first, because it was like the first draft had about 3 or 4 books worth in, and I had to realise actually it could be a lot simpler than that for the plot, but it's still, you still have to have your full plot there and your development and characters and everything, but it's much more simplified. So you have to really think about those sort of things and very much get into the age of your character, what age they are, what sort of vocab they'd use. And I've recently been working with Oxford University Press on a reading scheme book, so that they were very prescriptive on what words you can use for that. But that helped with thinking about things for autumn as well, and what words children need to use in school. And because at every stage you have to, it's almost like a tick list that they've got to learn certain words and phonics. And so it does make you very aware of it. And I don't know if I suppose I think of it less so as a right for older sort of teens and YA as well. It's
I think maybe for the older, like if you classify YA as your 14 plus, I mean, this is where we get into difficulty of trying to classify readership. I mean, from the way I approached it with Beowulf's Ghost and that teen is, I did think about it. I did think about sentence structure and vocabulary, but I tried not to limit it too much. And you know, when I've been through a lot of writing courses and classes and things like that, and exactly as you say, you read a lot. And when you read a lot, you realize sentence. So what you write about can be complex, but the sentence structure you want to keep it relatively simple. So rather than having like you might see in some adult books, very long sentences with lots of clauses, subclauses and things, that can get a bit confusing. So I was conscious of trying to keep sentences themselves in a fairly simple, or just a compound sentence with two pieces in from a technical point of view. But that didn't mean that I made the subject any less difficult. But when it comes to vocabulary, I was very careful, first of all, to try to make sure that I was using vocabulary that would be understood, but I do like to stretch the reader. I think it's really important that it's good to have words in there that they don't know, because I used to read books with the dictionaries next to me, so that if I didn't see a word I didn't know, so I think it's wrong to write simplistically thinking, well, therefore children can't understand words. Of course they can. And the way for them to learn is to stretch by putting sometimes words or phrases in that might be a little bit not really sure. And the way I was always taught to do it was, if the meaning is there, they will understand what the word means without knowing the word itself, by the meaning, by the context of the sentence. And that's obviously that is sometimes a way that you can write in a little bit more complex way and introduce people to new words. So I'm conscious of it, though. If that's part behind the question, I'm certainly conscious of it, and hopefully manage to execute that. Here's another question then. So Emma, where and when do you write?
Well, I'm a bit of an everywhere sort of writer and fitting it in around everything else I do. So, I was a childminder for many years, but I gave that up last year. But I also worked lunchtimes in a school. So my day is kind of a bit in and out the house and back and forth. And so I also edit as well, edit for other people. So I'm doing, I just fit it in everywhere. I've written in bed, on the settee. I have to write around, because I've got lots of children as well. It's a very busy household. So I've had to train myself to be able to sit in the living room. They could be watching things on their devices, but I'll always have a notebook there. So I'll write anywhere. I like it actually if I'm having to wait for one of the kids, and I don't drive, but so I sit in the passenger side. But if I'm waiting outside, say swimming or one of their sporting events, I'll get a lot of good stuff down because you can't do anything else. You're trapped in a car. It's a good time, and you can't really. Well, it's usually in my notebook as well. Though I do occasionally take my laptop in the car, but anywhere for me. So I don't know about for you. You've
well, that's interesting, because it sounds like you're okay to write with chaos going on around you. I think I do need a little bit of peace and quiet. So the library, again, is a place where I love writing in libraries. I love finding a Corel, the desk with the bits around it, and sitting in their computer and just losing myself. I put music on, usually film music. I like film music, collect that. So whether it's, from Game of Thrones or from Avatar, or, that kind of more dramatic kind of music, it definitely gets me into a zone where I can write. But I do like reasonably peace and quiet. So a library is great for me. I've tried writing in cafes. I've tried the J.K. Rowling thing, and I usually end up drinking too much coffee and eating rather than actually writing.
You're obliged to have more cake.
Yes, yeah, because I feel guilty that I'm using up the space. So, but no, I think for me, principally it'd be libraries, but at home as well. I've always tried to create a workspace wherever I am, so that I've got that space where I can create. But I think I need to create a zone for myself to write. And if there is noise around me, then I will do that through putting headphones on and listening to film music.
Listen to film soundtracks a lot, and I often put my headphones on when I'm sat in the living room.
Yeah,
It depends. If it's sort of free writing, I'm fine. But if I'm editing my writing, I need that a bit more focus, a bit more quiet.
Yeah, and I find it gets me into that zone. It's like a quick way of getting in. I mean, you may have found this, that when you're writing, sometimes if you just sit down cold, it can take quite a bit of time to actually get into the zone, into the characters, into the story. And sometimes I find film music will get me there much quicker with a certain theme of a music or something, and then I can force my way into it a little bit quicker.
Yeah, Pixar film soundtracks are really good for that. They seem to really nail the film scores.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. So we're approaching the end of the time of the session. I'm just going to check for any other questions. I think we touched on this earlier, but there is one. So the authors that have inspired you, I think you mentioned a couple. Are there any others you'd like to supplement that with?
Well, I suppose in recent years, Patrice Lawrence is a huge inspiration. I love her writing. Holly Jackson. I suppose I like things that are a bit dramatic. I like complicated and messy families, and I tend to read a lot of young adult books. I read more for teens than I ever did. Well, I don't think there was as much choice anyway when I was younger, but it's almost like I'm kind of enjoying being a teenager through the stories that are things that I've missed out on because those books weren't available so much. I used to read Sean Hudson and Stephen King all the times, and serial killer books in my teens. So now I'm coming back to a bit nicer things as I've got older.
But I think any writer can inspire. I mean, that's what it's about. I mean, for me, it may be not surprising, but I am influenced by Tolkien. I mean, I am a Tolkien nut, and I was very much influenced growing up, reading him, but also people like Henry Treece, the Viking stories, and Rosemary Sutcliffe, and someone that you don't hear so much of nowadays, but Michael Moorcock. I pretty much consumed nearly everything he wrote. He's a really excellent, fantasy, but weird fantasy story. And more latterly, I guess Philip Pullman, people like that. So, but I enjoy reading science fiction as well, and the fantasy series. So I think as long as it's good literature, then I'm comfortable just reading it, and I really enjoy getting the ideas from it as well. And I think just touching on one of the questions is, that it's important still to read your genre, because it does help you see how sentences are constructed and stories are constructed. So, if you were to write a story after reading Arthur C. Clarke and try to translate that directly into a children's book, it might become a little bit more difficult technically to read. So I do think, as you were saying earlier, it's very, very important to read the age of the books that the audience that you're writing for, because it just helps you. I think it helps you kind of articulate what you want to get across in a way that's then digestible.
Especially recent releases as well, because things change so much over the years. And I read a bit of Oscar Wilde again recently because I always loved the Picture of Dorian Gray.
Oh yes.
I read the opening, I think it was the first, at least a whole page, maybe 2 pages of sitting in the garden, sort of sitting on a bench. And I thought, gosh, when's the inciting incident going to happen?
Yes.
Things are just so much slower then, but now
Yes.
everything's a lot faster paced.
Yes, I think that's true. I mean, I think we're in the closing section now. There's no other questions. I think just finally then, in the last minute, is what advice would you give to anyone listening who wants to become a writer? Have you got a couple of quick fire comments?
Yeah, I always think find things that you feel passionate about and things that excite you, because
Agreed.
it really shows in your writing if you're having fun with it. And if it does get published, then you're going to have to go over and over that same story a lot, and there's going to be a lot of editing, and you're going to have to talk about it a lot. So it's better to have something that you really enjoy than, if it's been a hard slog. But usually if it's a hard slog, it's not going to work anyway. But yeah, to find passion project is, I think, what my agent referred to it as when I started Autumn.
I'd agree with that. I think definitely write what you really want to write. And the other piece, as we've said several times, is read. Just read everything you can get your hands on. I think that's what I would say. So. Okay, well, I think we're out of time, but I've really enjoyed that. So thank you, Emma. That's been really interesting talking to you. So thank you very much.
Okay, it's been lovely to chat about the books.
Yes, thank you. So we'll say goodbye now and close down. Okay, thank you. Bye.